Hello and welcome to CNBC Africa's second Building Africa panel discussion. My name is Bonney Tunya, and joining me to discuss the infrastructure deficit in East Africa and what is being done to fix it. From Nairobi, John Ponsonby is the Director for Infrastructure and Capital Projects at Deloitte. And in Kigali, Rwanda, we have Jules Ndenga, Chief Executive Officer at ATL Holdings. Joining him as well in Kigali is Patrick Nzeyimana, Project Manager at ROKO Construction, Rwanda. Welcome to the program. Gentlemen, the conversation about the role of infrastructure is one we can have for days. But John, let's start with you. Give us some of the trends you observe from where you sit at Deloitte in terms of what are our biggest opportunities and low-hanging fruits, if it were.
The biggest projects that there are at the moment in East Africa are very much focused around the transport and the energy sectors. Those two sectors dominate the market here within East Africa, and they've got great opportunities for the whole sector throughout all of the countries within the region.
Sure, John, just looking at your data very quickly, we do note that East Africa alone accounts for about 20% of the built environment in Africa in terms of constructions and deals. Let me just bring in Patrick in this. Patrick, from where you sit and where you work, are these deals just what we read on paper or they are real?
I think the private sector, which like ROKO Construction will be, haven't tapped into that side of the roads or energy. We have been tapping into more the building kind of infrastructure, real estate and building for the for great purposes in Kigali. I think that's where I see the private sector as it is now working in. But of course, yes, there is room to kind of tap into the area that John has just mentioned, which are roads and energy.
Interesting. And Patrick, just to paint to us a similar picture and give us a landscape of the East African space from the view of ATL Holdings, what do you make of it?
I think the years that we have seen in the past, particularly in Rwanda, the construction infrastructure has been, yes, developing very rapidly. Roads particularly have been a great boost to the operation that we normally run. We need good roads to get our goods in. And yes, power also has been a great progress in the latter years. So I would say that construction-wise, as operators here in East Africa, in Rwanda particularly, we have seen really good progress going forward, which has largely contributed to the success of some of the projects that we have been carrying on here in Rwanda.
Right, and let's just bring Jules in this conversation. Jules, looking at Africa as a construction site, as it were, we've seen these opportunities that both John and Patrick have been talking about attract a lot of FDIs, but more importantly, attract the Chinese. Even as we address the whole deficit, give us a sense of what is the role of FDIs and investors like China in this whole equation?
We very much don't see this as it's actually a huge opportunity that we have. Initially we had a kind of traditional developing partners in infrastructure, involved in infrastructure, and here you are talking about World Bank and African Development Bank, you can name them. China coming in is actually a huge opportunity because of the capital brought into the market, and access to that huge potential capital is a benefit for the region. We at the governance level, we've been making sure that we integrate that capital into our national budget to have a direct budget support and make sure that we have the ownership of whatever is implemented in the area, being from the decision making on what are the identified priorities for us, and later on into the implementation as well, to follow our rules and regulations, which are anyway aligned to the good practice in the business.
John, in Nairobi, looking at the whole, we all seem to agree that yes, there's a big opportunity. We seem to agree that yes, this opportunity is indeed attracting money from across the continent. But have we done enough as African policymakers to ensure that when these investors land here, they have a soft landing?
I think that the whole region has developed remarkably in the last few years. The ease of doing business is improving generally, and that is particularly the space in the infrastructure area. So it's very much the case that the international investors are welcomed to the region. We had more than 250 international investors and advisors for a major infrastructure conference in Kenya, and that is just a sign of the level of interest that there is out there that we can see coming forward because the opportunities are there.
But John, skeptics would argue there is ease of doing business in markets like Rwanda or Nairobi, but the cost of finance is still very high. So while I might be able to register my entity within 24 hours, I can't get funding from the banks.
You have to have a balance of the funding that there will be for these projects. They are huge. They will need often the DFIs to be part or full funders of them. And I think that is a route which is possible. There will also be the export finance agencies, depending on where the projects and the construction companies come from, who might be leading that, hopefully bringing on board local contractors to undertake a lot of the work.
Patrick, I'd like to hear your input on this whole question of policy and regulatory environment that favors investors. And John just mentioned the whole question of ease of doing business. But it's easy to set up, but is it really easy to do business? Give us a sense of the Rwandan experience.
One of the biggest challenge is, easy to get capital to start those kinds of projects. I think loans or credit or trying to attract capital have been, I think, one of the biggest hurdles on investing in those projects. I think the second thing will be a platform for private operators to be drawn into those mega kind of infrastructure projects and establish a way of getting a return on your investment, not in a medium term rather than a long term. We would be thinking of a private operator building a road and starts to charge, for example, a toll on the road. Those kind of platform or those kinds of framework, I think, will be one of the ways to get those biggest projects going. The other options that I've seen, or which will be, which I actually think have kind of started, will be the opportunity for the private operator to run the infrastructure for years or for a few years to make a return on his investment. So those are kind of framework which on the governance side will be one way of attracting private sector into the infrastructure projects.
Jules, Patrick has mentioned private investor. You are one, and from what your experience has been in Rwanda, first, is it easy to set up and roll out big ticket projects in that country? And what do you see as the biggest impediment under the umbrella of policy and regulatory framework?
I would link this actually to the earlier question about the kind of investment that you have according to the source of financing. You mentioned that the DFI and Chinese are on board, and this was very much appreciated during a kind of rehabilitation period after the war and the genocide in Rwanda. But then we realized that it can't be sustainable on the long term, and you have to bring the private investments on board and make sure that the private entities are actually in charge and the level of ownership from the local market is higher, so that those investments which were developed initially or brought in the capital market by DFIs and then implemented by contractors who would then come, implement, and run away from the business and have no level of accountability, now has been raised to the level where we can attract various private investments, where contractors would be part of the investment, maintain, operate the infrastructure which would be built, and then have a level of predictability. This would reduce as well the level of financial risks and then the cost of the capital, as you've been mentioning before.
Let me just go to Nairobi back, because you mentioned something that I want to bring back John in. I'd like us to dwell a little bit more on the role that the private investor or contractor is playing in just trying to gap this infrastructure deficit in East Africa. John, Jules and Patrick both have mentioned the fact that yes, there's increased space. Yes, we're having to see a lot of private players in this space. But what is the role of smaller private players who may be suppliers or subcontractors? Do we see them clearly in this equation, and do they get their fair share?
I think there's a vast role for the smaller private players. They won't be that visible in probably the key responses to tenders that there are, but they will be major suppliers to the larger organizations, both international and as the major local subcontractors that you will see on these large projects. They will need local input, and it would not be sensible for them to go and try and go it alone. So I think there is a great impact here. With the scale of the projects that we see, there is plenty of opportunity there for local small businesses to scale up and to get a share of the pie in these huge projects.
But then again, John, there's a lot of hand-holding that still needs to happen. Case in point, the construction of the standard gauge railway. Before local contractors had to petition the government, a lot of the supplies and material used to come from overseas. How do we ensure that it doesn't have to be a push and pull, that it's almost automatic that we give preference to the local producers?
I think we see that improving over time. That, I mean, obviously in the first initial projects, you may see less local content, but that as the local content gets used to the scale of the projects, the standards which are expected from the international companies, then it improves the capability that there is there. And we just need to make sure that we keep on pushing to develop that capability locally, because ultimately that's how the countries in East Africa will be able to develop on their own and be more self-sufficient.
Patrick, just building on that, how easy is it for local suppliers to get a piece of the big ticket infrastructure projects in Rwanda?
I think there was still, locally, the level of supply is still low. The suppliers locally here are still on a very, very low kind of strength. And I understand why. All material that we use in buildings are imported. They probably don't take a chance of importing material which is not necessarily going to be used straight away. So I think there is a need to develop the local suppliers or the local manufacturer to be able to supply to the local markets. I think there is still a lot of work to do, but then again, it's the same, it's like a vicious circle. You need good infrastructure in place for those manufacturers to kind of be able to operate and supply the market sufficiently. I think a lot of effort, and the company I work for has been involved into investing in logistics and investing in those kind of tools that we need to start supplying our own markets here.
Is it imported because it cannot be produced in Rwanda, or it is because contractors prefer supplies from overseas?
In the projects that I have seen, sometimes, and a lot of time I have to say, it has been imported because it's cheaper to buy it from abroad than getting it locally. I've seen a lot of examples where we have tried to source materials locally and they end up being on the higher side of the cost than just importing from larger markets around.
And just for scale, let's just bring Jules in this conversation. Jules, Patrick has brought out a very serious issue that maybe there is lack of capacity, but also there are quality issues. But then again, how do we truly build Africa if everything that we're using to build Africa is coming from elsewhere?
Oh yeah, it's actually a crucial question. Apart from the benefit that we are losing, the opportunities which are lost, but it's a question of ownership. How can you be part also of this effort if you are not amongst the one participating to put it in place? So, and if I can be systematic, and this is actually why infrastructure is essential and important for Africa, is that all those local potential are there, and they can be competitive. It's not a fatal fact to be just accepted like that. We can be competitive, our local materials can be competitive, our subcontracting contractors can be competitive, but we need then to put in place enabling environment, and this is where infrastructure comes on board by providing all the utilities, electricity, water, road and transport facilities, then to reduce the cost of doing business and work also. Of course, we can't deny that capacity building is a key element in that. But we can really compete. It's about us putting in place all the positive environments to be able to compete fairly with external materials and subcontractors.
Right, and just to shift focus slightly because we're just about to take a break, John, please address the concern that yes, we're putting together all these issues and Africa remains an attractive space, but address the planning space of things, because the sense that African infrastructure gets is that maybe it was not well thought out. Give us a feel of how the planning works in the African space as far as construction and infrastructure goes.
I think the planning has developed significantly. The quality of the studies which are being done to be able to support these major projects has improved remarkably over the last few years. So the feasibility studies that are being undertaken are there now to be able to say that this is technically feasible projects, that they are in the right space to be able to support and to be able to be bankable in the future. So I think it has improved quite a bit in recent years.
Does it paint a picture of a growing Africa? Because we might be investing in a project now to a population of about 5 million people, 6 million for the case of Nairobi, and in 5-6 years Nairobi is 8 million people. This might not be sufficient.
Certainly in these projects that they are looking at projections of where might traffic go, for example, in the case of highway projects. So they're looking at what the opportunities are and how that will develop in the future. It's not just looking at the current state, but assessing what's best to develop now and what to leave to later. So, for example, I'm at Deloitte. I'm currently advising on a bridge project in Kenya. And we're looking at 20-year traffic projections to see what is necessary to build now and how you might develop alternatively in later stages.
Very quickly, Patrick, are you happy with the sort of planning that goes into laying infrastructure projects in Rwanda, for example? Will it meet the needs of the future in 10, 15, 20 years?
I think the few infrastructure plan that I've come to know, I think will be, when in place, be able to get the use of the population or the business which we have in place. I can think of these big projects like the airports, big projects like the wastewater treatment for the city of Kigali, for example. The new infrastructure that I'm seeing in new real estate buildings, which kind of put together one system which sells a lot of houses in one go. Yes, I think the planning which is going on now, I think is really going into the right direction.
But surely, Patrick, the planning is going to the right direction, but the bureaucracy involved in getting these approvals is also in a different direction. You have to go through 5 offices to get 5 different approvals, and at times you get an approval that is contradicting one that was given by another one. This is seen in Kenya, in Tanzania, in Uganda. How big a challenge is this?
Okay, I think in projects that we have been involved in, I don't think the approvals have been particularly difficult process to go through. The one-stop center here in Kigali have been, from my opinion, quick and considerate of the builders or the contractors' concerns of advice or discussion that we've had. So I wouldn't say that in a market where I'm operating now that is such a particular problem.
Jules, your take on the same?
Just to mention one example, which is one of the projects that I'm actually in charge of. It's the airport development. And here I would like to touch on a point of anticipation in the planning and a kind of proactiveness rather than addressing existing issues. So one of the example in Rwanda is the development of the new airport. We have currently an international airport in the city of Kigali, but because of its particular location, it can't be expanded to accommodate all the predicted traffic that will come in within the 20 or 30 years we are talking about. So now we have decided to go to an investment with the private sector in the development of a new airport. This is the kind of examples, and we have a high-level commitment of the government, and all the decisions are made on time and proactively. So we are very much happy about the responsiveness of all the actors. Now, it has to be duplicated in all the areas, all the sectors, and in the region to be able then to address all our issues.
Interesting, gentlemen. We have to take a quick breather, but time for a quick break. After this, we'll be getting back to what is the future of a built African environment as we look at the bankability of this project. Stay tuned. Welcome back to our discussion on fixing the infrastructure deficit in East Africa. Stay with me. From Nairobi is John Ponsonby, the Director of Infrastructure and Capital Projects for Deloitte. And in Kigali, Rwanda's capital, we have Jules Ndenga, who's the Chief Executive Officer of ATL Holdings, and Patrick Nzeyimana, Project Manager at ROKO Construction, Rwanda. Gentlemen, thank you for staying with me. Let's shift our focus now, because we've all agreed that there's a lot that is being done either by the governments, by the policymakers. It is attracting investors. We are seeing investors troop in. Let's get to the payback and how indeed this project pay back to their economies. Let me start off with John in Nairobi. How bankable are some of the projects we've been seeing in the past 10 years in Nairobi? And feel free to mention what stands out for you.
I think the level of bankability, Bonney, is improving. That the projects are being better structured now to be able to bring in the investors that are needed. Because I think it was Patrick who was saying earlier that the private sector is needed to a great extent to be able to fund and contribute both in construction and in funding for these projects to help governments to deliver the social and economic benefits that they need.
Talk to us about the trade financing arrangement that you do see in Nairobi and how it's working, especially for big ticket projects. For
big ticket projects, as long as they're well structured, I think that the finance will be there. Whether it be from export finance from individual countries, or whether it be DFIs, or whether it be local banks. So there is projects there, there is funding there. But as Patrick was mentioning, I think the finance in some cases can be very expensive. So that is something which holds these projects back.
Right, Jules, give us a Rwandan experience on just financing this project in terms of cost and also accessibility from contractors and developers like yourself.
I will touch on 3 points, if I may say. The first of all, it's about really buying the vision of our countries and where we want to be and what we are doing as the efforts is made. To make sure that the private sector that we would like to bring in, and here I'm talking about the financial part of the private sector, accepts really that idea. Then one would have a way of assessing the bankability in the most visionary way, rather than only looking at the current numbers, but looking at the upfront numbers that are coming in. Let's give you an example of Rwanda some years back. Many of the investment done at the time was not considered as really viable by the financial markets, but we developed five-star hotels, which has now a high rate of occupancy, and everyone now regrets not to be part of that deal at the beginning. And this is systematic for many implemented projects in infrastructure. We realize that they are viable, but once they are implemented. Now we need to move to a level where the private sector buys in the vision and make then the financials and the number reflects really the reality on the ground.
Jules, other than buying the vision, if you had a chance to sit at a table where, as a financier, what would you be looking for in a project?
Well, of course, financial doesn't like risk, or they would like to mitigate them the maximum as they can. So the idea here is to make sure that there is a fair partnership with all the actors, make sure that the one that can cover part of the risk to make the project viable is really willing to do so, which has been done quite positively in Rwanda, which is the context that I know. Where the government has taken some level of risk for aspects which are related to, let's say, land acquisition. You know that this is a big challenge in infrastructure projects. So governments are working on regulations to make sure that that part of the risks are covered by the one who can deal with them properly. So if I'm sitting with financials, I would bring in all the actors and make sure that risks are dispatched so that the real value of the projects is highlighted and comes on everyone's attention.
Let's bring in Patrick in this. Patrick, obviously the payback cycles are different for the different projects depending on what you are trying to undertake. Are financiers patient with you on this front?
I think Rwanda economy is a very vibrant economy, and I'm really, really optimistic on the return of your investment if you ever choose to invest here. I think the projects that have been happening here are very bankable. I'll give, for instance, companies who have invested in real estate, I think, got a return of their investment very, very quickly. I think the only thing that I think is missing in terms of infrastructure, in terms of roads and power, is that framework which would show, one, that the contractor can make a return on investment straight away, but also that the bankers see the return of the investment. I think it's something which is doable. I think the projects which are going on have been, I think, profitable. I think there is a good positive aspects on the return of your investment.
But just going back to John in Nairobi, John, we've talked of bankability from a commercial financier's point of view, but a lot of these large ticket projects are also funded by governments and economies. And we've had skeptics and critics question the timeline and the prioritization of some of these. Case in point has been Kenya, where the standard gauge railway took up more than half of the country's GDP. And people are wondering, did we put our money in the right space, and when will we even reap the benefits of this?
It's vital that the economy does get the benefit of the infrastructure projects that are being planned. And to that effect, it's important that we structure the projects so that they can be delivered and that the private sector can see that the risks that have been allocated to them they will be comfortable with, that they will be able to deliver on the projects, and that governments or whoever has to pay for the projects at the end of the day will have that money to be able to pay the money back.
And John, on that, that's why I'm wondering, how do we have this kind of conversations with policymakers in government when they're deciding we'll take up X part of our budget to a certain project? Do we have this sort of exchanges? Do we have this sort of questions raised?
Certainly. I and my colleagues at Deloitte have these sort of conversations regularly. And so when we're looking for approval for a particular project, that has to be taken up to the relevant committees to be able to convince them and to convince the Debt Management Office within the National Treasury of the Government of Kenya that the project is a sensible one and that the country is able to afford it.
All right, gentlemen, let's shift our focus slightly to extending our projects and trying to just leverage on them. And there's a question of the free movement of people and goods and basically a freer environment for business in the region. Recent times, we've seen this curtailed in the region with questions of whether indeed East Africa is moving together as a bloc. Some of these projects will require Tanzania, Uganda to be part of them for them to be economically viable. Have we done enough to ensure that there is free movement of people and goods, John?
I think that there is a lot which is happening, but much more can be done. For example, Deloitte is advising on a project to help with the free movement trade through to Rwanda on logistics. So there are projects which are out there at the moment. But a lot of these mega projects need the cooperation between different countries to be able to create a corridor. So, for example, the LAPSET project to lead from Kenya to South Sudan, Ethiopia, that involves coordination between the different countries to make sure that each of them delivers their part of the project to get the good for the overall sake of the region.
Jules, cooperation and coordination is a main point that John is making regarding this. Give us real-life experiences from, say, Rwanda. Have we done enough as governments, as peoples, to ensure that people from other economies can access and leverage our projects? Because some of them, like I said earlier, go beyond our borders.
Oh yes, surely. And here I will mention an example of the Northern Corridor integration projects. And indeed, what you are mentioning is really critical. When that initiative started, the various countries involved were focusing more on looking at infrastructure projects that can be implemented together. This is the railway project, the electricity interconnection lines mentioned by John earlier under the LAPSET initiative, and so on, and many initiatives. But then they realized what was crucial is that there were some soft actions which sometimes doesn't look very much beneficial, but which has to be there to enable then people working together. And this is where it was put in place opportunity for people to travel using their ID card and just remove the passport use. And the customs being a little bit more proactive to address all the requirements in terms of customs and taxes regimes and so on and so forth. So that was put in place, and we are seeing now the signs of it. I would like also to mention the labor. The labor was also an issue, and now we are able to share expertise across the region where people are allowed to move and go work in Uganda, Kenya, Rwanda, Burundi, Tanzania freely. This initiative under the Northern Corridor is showing really the progress made by the countries to make sure that we increase our market and to make sure that we collaborate efficiently in implementing projects, especially infrastructure projects.
Patrick, you want to jump in on that and just give us your take on the whole coordination and cooperation in the region?
Yes, I think there's been a tremendous effort by the policy makers into facilitating the movements of goods and people within the region. I think Rwanda is one of the most foreigner-friendly country in the world. I think we've had people moving across Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania freely. Rwandans do the same. I think there's been a great result of the collaboration, of the sharing the human resources. I think that's I think will be at a very good, satisfying point. Goods, I think there is still some work to do. Some of the taxation policies for example, so goods brought from Kenya or from Tanzania are still not like 100% implemented, and hopefully when that gets sorted, I think it will be much easier to move goods and people around the sub-region.
And gentlemen, as we come to the final quarter of this conversation, I'd like us to shift our focus to reimagining the future of infrastructure in East Africa. And John, since you're the man with the numbers here, give us a sense of what trends you're seeing now and how do we reimagine the future of well-built East Africa?
I can see a massive change. Governments are focusing throughout the region on the development of infrastructure to help the economy as a whole. Maybe if I take the road sector as an example, at the moment we have a situation where the tarmac roads are probably around 10% of the total road network in the region, so not a high proportion. But governments are focusing on developing those to make a substantial difference, to make it easier to get goods to market, to be able to get people from their home, to get to work, to see where the opportunities lie, and to develop the whole economy.
And John, still on that, there's the whole age-old question of who came first, the egg or the chicken, because skeptics have argued that at times African economies and policymakers invest a lot more in areas that they may not be. For example, there's a lot of noise about, for example, the Thika Superhighway in Nairobi. And the question is, did the people of Thika and Nairobi need a superhighway, or did the government need to invest in other business enablers?
I think that is a choice for government to decide where its priorities lie on the infrastructure network. But what we see at the moment is that the two of the main projects which government is developing here are expansion of the Northern Corridor. So it is looking at the trade routes to develop the economy, which would be not just for the benefit of Kenya, but also for Uganda and into the Congo. So there are rational decisions which are being made by governments on their assessment of what's best for the economy as a whole.
Right, and Patrick, what does ROKO see as the future of a well-built East Africa?
I think ROKO is looking at an expanding kind of East Africa in terms of infrastructure, real estate and development in general. We are very much optimistic on what is coming. We see a very vibrant economy going on, and yes, everybody wants to be part of it. We are already part of it, but we can see development which is going to be, I think, even quicker than what we see now. So yes, I think there is a bright future ahead.
Jules?
I really agree with what he said. Africa was consistently trying to work on creating the positive environment and make sure that everything goes in the right direction. Now we have to get the benefit from that, and this is actually the case we are observing already in Rwanda, and this is what is also the case in East Africa in general. And in Africa, we should be proud now to look forward and make sure that things happen right. And I'm very optimistic about that, and there is no doubt.
Jules, certainly the future of a built Africa is happening within a context of an emerging world, and there are concerns right now, like global change, for example. My concern, and probably a question, and you could guide us from what is happening in Rwanda, have concerns like global warming and climate change been put in place in the thinking and planning of infrastructure projects, especially the large ticket ones?
Oh yes, this is a key issue. The global concern about all the environmental issues were a challenge at the beginning, where people were looking at them as a threat for implementation of various projects and activities of human beings. but now we are looking at it more as an opportunity. You know, Africa is one of the continents where you have in energy, for example, unlimited resources that we can capture and then integrate it in the best manner, in a sustainable way in our development. So we integrate that and we make sure that we capture it in our development so that we don't face the situation faced by some developed countries where reforms and becoming more challenging now.
John, when you advise your clients or governments who are taking up projects, how high in the priority list is global climate change, and do they look at it as a cost center or as an opportunity?
I think that we're in the fortunate position in East Africa that the main drivers for reducing global climate change and for having affordable energy are actually in the same place. So I'm encouraged, for instance, that Deloitte's Africa Construction Trends report for 2016 shows that 4 of the top 10 projects for the region are renewable energy projects. So whether it be hydro or whether it be Turkana wind, there are opportunities here. And there's also geothermal. So the Olkaria field has great opportunities to develop, and there is the opportunity here in East Africa that East Africa can get the power it needs and at an affordable price whilst not having climate change impacts.
And how would we encourage this, John? Because some would say, well, maybe investors in this space need a bit of incentive. Is that a thought you share?
I think that investors are keen already. I don't think there is that much extra incentives which are going on. The government is looking at changing the way that it incentivizes, but there are people who are keen both from a private perspective and also from a government bilateral funding perspective.
Gentlemen, we want to bring this to a landing and like to give you each a chance to give your closing comments in regard to what you see as the biggest disruptor or opportunity as far as the infrastructure deficit goes. But I'd like to start with Patrick as you react on the climate change situation, and then give us your closing comments.
Yeah, on the climate change point, I think it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity for Africa, for the region, to tap into new technology without necessarily going through all the development process that, you know, other economies have to go through. Cost-effective solutions. I think it's a great opportunity. The biggest problem is that a lot of the work or a lot of the material are imported. It's kind of a problem. And yes, it's a chicken and egg situation. You have to get infrastructure in place to be able to go away with that kind of problem. I think with time, I think Rwanda or the sub-region is investing in logistics, in infrastructure. Businesses are starting to look at a long-term kind of exercise, and I'm confident that in the future, it will take time, but in the future I see the infrastructure, the systems helping the construction in general.
Jules, your closing comments?
Oh yeah. First of all, I think we in our region a lot have been done. However, we still have to improve on the environment, doing business environment in our region. Make sure that we remove all the barriers that remains, because there are still a few. But then on the opportunities side, I would insist very much on the local content aspects, whereby we have to develop really strong partnership between our local markets and the very high-skilled partners across the world, and make sure that we bring them on board in our country. We can partner, everyone can benefit from it, but then the partnership has to be fair and strong to sustain the development of our social and economic framework.
And finally, John, take us home.
I see the main opportunities in infrastructure in the immediate future to remain the main areas of infrastructure deficit, of transport and energy. as those are fulfilled, I can see that real estate is starting to show even greater growth at the moment to actually support the developing economies that we see throughout the region. So I can see those are the three areas where there will be particular opportunities on infrastructure.
Right, gentlemen, many thanks. We've spent the past hour trying to reimagine the future of a built East Africa in the wake of that whole infrastructure deficit. We've looked at challenges, we've looked at yardsticks of success, but more importantly, what is clear from my conversations here is that opportunities still abound and Africa is still building. That's why we leave it. Thanks to my guest, John Ponsonby, who's a Director for Infrastructure and Capital Projects at Deloitte. Also in Kigali, Rwanda's capital, Jules Ndenga, Chief Executive Officer at ATL Holdings, and Patrick Nzeyimana, Project Manager at ROKO Construction, Rwanda. My name is Bonney Tunya. Thank you for watching.